So this month's talk is From Fundamentalism to Freedom, and our board member Ben, who is a humanist chaplain, will share his story of how he moved from his Christian fundamentalist background to humanism with a short detour in a cult. So from there, take it away, Ben.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Carl said, I'm a humanist chaplain. I serve on the board here as a member at large, and I'm a member at large on the board of the Humanist Society, who is the overarching body that endorses humanist chaplains. I'm also the first humanist chaplain to become a certified educator of chaplains. So regardless of your background, you have to go through a certain training process, an internship and a residency of supervised education, very similar to social workers. And I'm certified to do that education, and I'm the first humanist to be able to do that. So I'm excited to be a part of that. And I'm excited to share my journey, which includes a lot of that transition, how I got into humanism and became involved in humanism. That has a lot to do with the work that I'm doing now. That's kind of a tease as to what comes at the end of things. But at the beginning of things is the fundamentalism piece of things. And I'm going to start at the very, very beginning. I was born 1976 to a family. When I talk about fundamentalist Christianity, I am talking about fundamentalist Christianity with a capital F, not in the modern pejorative sense of, oh, they're a fundamentalist, but fundamentalist Christianity, if you're unfamiliar, actually has like 5 or 6 fundamentals. I used to know them at one point in time. That is a core to what is considered fundamentalist Christianity. We often connect those nowadays to the modern evangelical movement, and things along those lines. And that's the family I was born into. My father and mother met at Bob Jones University. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that university. It is it did, give you a sense of what it was like. They only just now allowed interracial dating in the 2000s. So they're not the more progressive, open-minded sort of folks. And that's the family I was raised in. My aunts and uncles and cousins, everybody went to Bob Jones University. And I am my brother went to Cedarville University in Ohio, which is just a titch more to the left of Bob Jones, but not by much. And in my immediate biological family, and my family system is a little complicated, and we'll get to that in a bit, but in my biological family, I'm the first person to not go to a religious institution at all for university studies, for college. I'm the secular guy, and I'm the one that people point to and say, don't go to OSU, don't go to a secular university because you'll end up like Ben, which I kind of wear as a badge of honor, right, at this point in time. So in 1976, I was born into this family. My dad was actually a part of a church plant from Calvary Bible Church into what is now known as Northwest Bible Church, which is a huge mega church on the west side of town. If you look at photos of some of the early days in downtown Hilliard, you'll see my dad holding a little baby, and that little baby is me. And so my dad has been very involved in this in the fundamentalist Christianity and that perspective of Christianity from the get-go. The wrinkle in all of this is that in about 1981, my parents got divorced, which in the fundamentalist Christian world is not seen very well. We don't need to go into the whole variety of reasons, but my parents got divorced. My mom was dating a physician who was an alcoholic. And she thought it was safer for me to not be raised with them. And so she signed over parental rights to my father. And so my dad in the 1980s was a single dad with 2 kids, newly divorced in fundamentalist Christianity. It's just a weird place to be. and we were living in Columbus at the time, and my dad needed some support. And so that's when he decided to move me and my biological brother down to Greenville, South Carolina, where Bob Jones University is, and he wrote there. He worked there at the Bob Jones University Press. Because he was divorced, they wouldn't put his name on any of the books that he wrote. So that got us closer to my aunts and uncles, my grandparents. We had a good family support system there. Unfortunately, as with often happens in divorces, it was not a friendly divorce. And my father's side took the story that my dad was this wonderful human being, and my mother was this evil person who was persecuting him from the devil, and that she had abandoned us. And as a 4 and 5-year-old kid who's hearing that from all of these people of authority who are showing that they love him, that abandonment narrative got real deep into how I understood the world. And I came to manifest the way many children that feel abandoned are. It was very angry, it was very violent. My siblings, the person that my mom was dating at that time was the alcoholic, now recovered alcoholic, but they got married. He had 3 kids from his first marriage. So my step siblings were all terrified of me because my temper was just horrible. My biological brother still has a scar on his leg when I pushed him through a storm door in South Carolina because he just pissed me off so much. These are all typical manifestations of abandonment as a child. True to fundamentalist Christianity, though, they looked with skepticism, if not pure derision, on therapeutic interventions and psychology. And so they kind of just let me be, which did not work out too well for me as I was growing up. Got in a lot of fights. And my dad eventually decided that a part of the reason why I was such a problem child was because I was so far from my mom. He didn't connect the fact that the story they were telling about my mom was that she abandoned us and hated us, and perhaps that might fuel some anger of a young kid. But he did think that it would be better to move us back to Columbus. So in about 1986, we moved back to Columbus, Ohio. We were still in a fundamentalist place. My dad was no longer working for Bob Jones University, but he became a teacher at a Christian school called Worthington Christian High School, which is where he taught up until his death in January. So he taught English as literature. He taught Bible. He taught history. This is sort of he went to OSU eventually for education. He had his master's in education. This was his thing. He was a teacher at heart. And so getting back to Columbus, getting me closer to my family, still maintaining this theology, though, of an absolute right and wrong, of an absolute understanding that we are right and everybody else is wrong, and that even if you claim to be Christian, if you are not our Christianity, you're still not the right Christianity, and you're still very much wrong and very much going to hell. And I say that in the sense of this, when we get to the cult time of things, this idea, this very strict understanding of right and wrong, this absolute, there is a truth with a capital T, there is an absolute right and wrong. That mentality, I think, set me up in part to become a part of this cult in my teens, my late teens and early 20s. But coming closer then to home, the narrative of the abandonment from my mom, some of the relational issues I was having with her and my stepfather and my siblings, all of that still kind of was in core of me. And even though we were closer to my mom now living in Columbus again, it was, the relationship with my mother had already been pretty damaged. I was angry at her safe to say I hated her, even though she had rights for me to visit. I didn't want to go near her, and neither parent really forced me or enforced me to go over to see my mom unless I really, really, really wanted to, which I didn't really want to do. So even through middle school and high school, as my temper started getting better under control and I started to calm down a bit, there was still a resentment and an anger towards my mom. And but and this will come into play later as I move out of Christianity into humanism. But just keep that in mind. Relationship with my mom, not great, really bad. Relationship with my dad was actually pretty good. I was called Little Iten in high school because I was so much like him. I looked like him. I had the same mannerisms of him. If you were to talk to us on the phone, you wouldn't know who was who. And so in high school, I got that moniker of Little Iten, which I wore with a badge of pride, and really enjoyed that. Also in high school, I met the woman who would become my wife. We met in, I did theater and so did she. And, when you meet someone who is still attracted to you after putting your makeup on and putting the age lines on you. So she's seeing you when you look like when you're going to be 40 or 50 years old and she still wants to hang out with you. You know, that's somebody you want to keep hold of. And we enjoyed each other's company. She was a year behind me. When I graduated from high school, I went to a college in Indiana for a semester, and she was still here. Short story of that is my grades did not work out. I got a 0.75 my first semester there. That takes a lot of work, but I was really into theater and not into class. And so they asked me to not return, understandably. So I came back to Columbus, and Jamie, my wife, graduated and she went to Pennsylvania. But we continued to date. We decided that we loved each other. We were going to get married anyway, so why not get married now? And so at the age of 19 and 18, we eloped. Went to a place on the east side of town, got married on a Saturday, and Jamie was still in Pennsylvania. So she came down for the week. Back then you needed a week between getting your license and getting married. So she came down for the weekend. We got our license on Monday. We got married on Saturday, and she went back up to Pennsylvania on Sunday. What happened was, if you're not familiar with this, when you get married, Social Security sends the woman a letter that says, hey, congratulations on your wedding. If you want to change your name, now is the time to do it. Here's how you go about it. Well, being young and naive and not quite thinking things through, when we filled out the marriage license, when it came time for a permanent address for Jamie, we put her parents' address. So the IRS sent a letter to Jamie Iten at her parents' address. Her parents, thinking it was a joke, opened it up, saw the letter, proverbial things hit the fan, and chaos ensued for a bit. Fortunately, there was a man involved in that church at the time that is part of the Grace Brethren Church, the Worthington Christian High School Church, said, chill out. They'll be fine. Just being mad at them and disowning them is going to make things worse. Let's just kind of create a space. And so once she finished her first semester in Pennsylvania, she came back to Columbus, and we became more of a unit at that point. At this point, my mom and my stepfather own a bunch of rental properties, and they allowed us a place to move in on our own at a discounted price. Being 19 and 18, not a lot of income. And so in this way, my mom is starting to reach out to say, hey, I know she would say, I know I screwed up, but I'm trying to, show you that I love for you in these different ways. And it was at this point, though, that if you're familiar with the way cults work, they like to target people who are in their late teens, just out of their family, especially in places of instability, like, say, I don't know, you elope, and you're trying to get your feet under you. And a friend of ours from high school came over and hung out and said, hey, we have this guy or this church that we think you would be interested in. And why don't you come and hang out and see what you think? And we said, sure. And so the reason that they thought we might like this place was, or one of the reasons that this guy or this church intrigued us was because in high school, I started really doubting this Christian faith that I was raised in. In part, I saw the God represented in the New Testament as really kind of a bipolar opposite of the God that was represented in the Hebrew Bible. So, I thought, how do these two gods coexist at the same time? I must be missing something. Let me go back and if I had this idea that if I could go back and study the way that Judaism understood the Hebrew Bible up to the time of Jesus, I could see where this transition happened, and really kind of understand Christianity as a whole. So I was really starting to become curious and really started investigating the Jewish roots of Christianity. And I really started to doubt the stories, the theologies, the conservative political ideology that I was raised in, and was looking for something new. The leader of this church, that I was not aware of was a cult at that time, but he went to Cambridge University in England. He studied the Jewish roots of Christianity. He was a very smart guy. He learned the Talmud. He learned Arabic, Aramaic, Hebrew. He was very well versed in Judaism and in Christianity. And so this was kind of his jam too. And so the first time we met, went to this church. There was a potluck afterwards, and we're hanging out and talking. And he sat down and talked with me for 2 or 3 hours after church. I was just like grilling him on all the questions that I had, and he was providing me answers. And at the time, as a 19-year-old, I experienced that as here's this guy really willing to just let me ask my questions, figure out what was going on for myself. And he was interested in what I was interested. This guy had it. He was really great. And so over time, Jamie and I really just got quickly involved in the community aspect of this space. And that was a really great place at that time. We were hanging out in Grandview, hanging out with people who were a little bit older than us, playing music, playing guitar, having jam sessions, being intellectually stimulated as this Jewish roots of Christianity. But then subtly over time, there starts to become a clear, even within the cult, an us and them environment, until you became really baptized into this community. There was a strict line for them. In particular, it was around what's, if you're, it sounds like many of you have Christian background, so the Lord's Supper or the Eucharist piece of things. You weren't allowed to take the Eucharist and thus show yourself as becoming a part of the Christian community until you got baptized, which means that you had given, that you had shown yourself theologically in line with Eric, the leader of this group. And so So as you go through that process over time, you increasingly give over more and more control over who you are and little bits and pieces, and things that seem healthy at the time um, actually end up being tools of control and manipulation. For example, um, he picked up on this narrative that my family had told, that my mom is this evil person and my dad is the saint. It doesn't take much wisdom to realize that people are more complicated than saints and demons. And so, he encouraged me to go to my mom and get her side for the first time ever on what her experience was of the divorce, and that complicated things. At the same time, um, my dad feeling very persecuted now as his authority is being replaced by Eric, started uh, passive aggressively lashing out at me in various ways. I would talk to my dad. He would get mad at something I said, but instead of expressing his anger towards me or his hurt towards me, he would talk to my grandmother. Inevitably, 3 days later, I would get a letter from my grandmother telling me how much I had hurt and disappointed my dad. And the cycle would continue. So there was this like lovely passive aggressive undertone from my dad, which helped push me away from him. This newly formed, though real tense relationship with my mom, as I'm understanding some of the complexities of things. And the end result being that Eric used this as a real subtle way to isolate me from my family, because he maintained the tension with my mom. He broke me off from my dad. And in the end, the only authority left for me, the only family left for me was Jamie. We were having kids now, we had 2 kids, and the community that we had built within that space. Again, we were looking for really right and wrong. So if you did not understand Jesus the right way from this really Jewish roots of Christianity way, and not even that, but Eric's understanding of the Jewish roots of Christianity way, then you might be Christian, but you weren't really Christian. You weren't really a part of the elect community. There, in a sense, that makes you feel special. It makes you feel unique. You got an in on the truth, and you're a little smarter than everybody else. You're a little quicker than everybody else. You got a little more of a deeper understanding of the Bible than everybody else. It feels kind of special. It feels kind of good. And the result, though, is that if you're not a part of this group, you don't have any friends. Your friends are completely this group, this community. In the midst of all of this, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 melanoma carcinoma. And this was probably 9 years into the time in the cult. And with my mom, the relationship would strengthen and wane. And one of those weaker parts of our relationship was when she was diagnosed with cancer. And so she was calling to try to get a hold of us, to talk to us. And I was avoiding her calls because I didn't want to be, from the cult's perspective, I didn't want to be yoked to my mom. I needed to be separated from her. I didn't want to be a part of her sin, not quite real Christianity of things. And so I was not picking up her calls. Eventually, my stepsister called me, and I thought, well, if my stepsister is calling me, this is really weird. So I picked that phone up, and she said, you need to talk to your mom. So I called my mom, and she told me that she had this diagnosis and the prognosis of 6 to 8 months. And that was in January. And then by August of that year, she had died. So the docs were really spot on the money as far as their timing went. But this leads a bit into my leaving of this cult. This had been about 9 years in this cult, from the age of 19 at that point to about 28. The friends, again, were all within this community. There's nobody outside of this community that we really had friends with. If we had any relationships with people outside of this community, people we worked with, things along those lines, it was only if we could justify that we were evangelizing them in order to bring them into the community. And if there was any relationship that was not that, we would be rebuked, we would be corrected, and oftentimes in front of the church, just because of, it was showing that we were weakening in our faith. We were not really being wholeheartedly committed to the community. So at one point in this community, she's diagnosed, and as it's coming towards the end of this time, end of her life, Eric, the leader of the community, really was like, you should not be spending any time with your mom. Don't go over there unless you're going to go over there to evangelize for her. She needs, if you want to go over there and give her the gospel, go over and give her the gospel, but otherwise you shouldn't go talk to her. So probably a month and a half before she died, I went over there and I gave her the gospel, told her she was going to go to hell, told her that if she did not repent of her sins, that, she would be separated from God, from us. If I'm looking back on things, it's one of the great regrets of my life, that conversation. It was a night with lots of tears, anger, pain, unnecessary pain. Looking back, and this is part of, as I'm coming to understand chaplaincy, I'm able to see some of the emotional things that were going on with me beyond the theology. I think of theological language as couching, as hiding a lot of our emotional communications of things now. But in that time, it was painful, lots of tears, lots of anger, and it was almost the last conversation that I had with her. But that was the conversation that I thought I needed to have. That's the conversation that I thought was a loving conversation to have with her, because I wanted to save her soul. I didn't want her to go to hell. Needless to say, but I will say it anyway, it did not go well. She rejected that offer. She did not convert to our Christianity. And they had not long after that moved to Maine for my mom, the kind of place for my mom to die. My stepfather was taking a new position at a hospital up there. And as it was becoming increasingly closer, within the next couple of weeks, it just became real clear that she was declining quickly. And if I was going to go see her ever again, that I would need to go to Maine. Again, Eric, the leader of the cult, said, no, don't go. At this point, he quoted, there's a Bible verse from Jesus, where a disciple, he's calling disciples to come to him, and Jesus says, the disciple says, I'll come and follow you, but I think it's literally, my mom is dying, I need to go take care of her. And Jesus says, no, let the dead bury the dead, come and follow me. Well, the cult leader said, no, let the dead bury the dead, come and follow me. In a bit of odd independence from him at that time, I said, no, I'm going to go see my mom. So I went up and I saw my mom. And that was a good week. That was a healing week from that earlier conversation that we had, but there's still tension there. And that was when I left. She died a week after I left from Maine, after that visit. But when I came back, true to form, Eric brought me in front of the men of the church and rebuked me for going to see my mom and not following his teachings. A week later, she died. And I wanted to be involved in the funeral planning, wanted to be involved in the funeral. And again, the leader said, no, again, let the dead bury the dead, come and follow me. Again, in a weird spot of independence, I said, no, I'm going to go to my mom's funeral. I went to my mom's funeral. again, I was brought in front of the men of the church and rebuked for going to my mom's funeral. And you would think that at this point, 28, almost 29 years old, I would be smart and be like, screw you, I'm leaving. But no, again, the strong sense of right and wrong and the desire to be right and the desire for a strong sense of truth and the way that I had to make meaning out of all of this shit that I had put my mom through was, I'm going to learn from this and not die separated from God. I'm going to give myself even more wholeheartedly into this community. And so that's what I did. And Eric, the leader, recognized this. And over the few months that I was, wholeheartedly into this community, he said, he recognized this. We had moved from the university, Ohio State University, to the suburbs, and things are not going well in the suburbs because people are older and more stable and less prone to be, open to emotional and spiritual abuse. So we were going to move back to campus. So he asked me to go back to OSU to get my undergraduate degree because I had dropped out, and that I should get my undergraduate degree in Jewish studies, again, because of the Jewish roots of Christianity. And so I went back to OSU. I majored in Jewish studies. My advisor was the foremost scholar on Jewish magic. And I started to really, again, for the first time outside of Eric's authority, explore the Jewish roots of Christianity and Judaism at the turn of the Common Era. And I started to realize that, and my advisor and the other professors, they were becoming these counter voices to the voices of Eric. And they were actually really encouraging me to think for myself. And it was okay to disagree with them and have thorough debates about things. This intellectual, this fed into that intellectual curiosity, but in what I experienced as a much healthier way. And it started to get me independently away from Eric. During that process, I became quite literally a Unitarian in the classical sense of Unitarian, where Jesus is the creature and not the creator, a human being. And I also became quite literally Universalist in the sense of, God's love would not allow God to condemn anybody to hell, if hell should even exist. Well, when you're in a very conservative Christian cult, that does not go over very well. So as I was going through this independence, I had started to slowly withdraw from the leader of the cult, and he started to pick up on this. Eventually, he had this conversation. We had this phone call. He said, "What's going on?" And I just finally just kind of laid it all out for him. I don't think Jesus is. I don't think Jesus is the Son of God anymore. Actually, I don't think he's God. I don't even think he's the Messiah. I don't even think we can talk about a Messiah. And I said, I need to leave this community. I need to figure things out, and this isn't a good place for me. Recognizing that when you leave the cult, you leave everything behind. And that Jamie, my wife, was not in agreement with me at this point. She was still very much believing in the teachings of the cults. I said, this is me, this is not Jamie. Jamie and my daughters, they can still, let them stay with you and your community. This is my issue, not theirs. But he said, no, if you're not here, they're not here. And they kicked them out too. So we had spent 10 years in this community at that point, almost exactly. We had cut off all of our families. We had cut all of our friends were in this community. And after 10 years, it was my wife, my two daughters and me, and that was it. And we had no community, no support, um, and we didn't know what the hell we were going to do. Um, and uh, it was a very lonely, isolating, scary place to be. I had not graduated with my undergrad degree yet. I had gone to get my undergraduate degree for this church. So now I was like, I'm out of this church. Do I want to continue this? What the hell am I going to do? Um, and Jamie did not have any degree. She had stayed home with our kids. She had raised our kids. And we were kind of at a loss. I decided that I would continue, that I would at least finish the undergraduate degree. Um, and I would then go on to get a master's or to get into graduate school at OSU in Hebrew, and kind of go and start going the academic route. But when it comes to the community of things, we were alone. We didn't know what to do. We didn't have anybody near us. So what it turns out happened is that my mom, the week after I had left and before she died, my siblings had gone up. I was at that point, I was the middle of 7 between step siblings and half siblings, and my mom had taken really great care to make sure that we saw each other as siblings. We don't talk about each other really as stepbrothers or half sisters. It's, you know, I have a brother named Ben because I don't see him as my stepbrother. He's my brother, even though we share the same name. But during that week, she had apparently gone out of her way, and as she had talked to some of my siblings, said, Ben is in a bad place, but he's going to come out of that. And when he does, I want you to be there for him. So humanity loved him. When it got out that we had left, we started getting phone calls. My brother called, said, hey, you want to hang out? My sister called, said, hey, you want to hang out? And this family that I rejected, I said, no, we're going to be there for you. It's not great. It's not perfect. You know, you don't heal 10 years of separation easily or overnight. But we had a community when we didn't think we had one. And for me, that was a lesson of really just the importance of community, the importance of people taking care of each other, the importance of people not being alone, but in the midst of everything, the power of forgiveness, the power of community, and the power of love for each other. And that, for me, one of the core ideas of humanism that I just love is this interdependence of humanity, that we are a community of people, both locally and globally. And it is, when I'm talking about my work as a humanist chaplain, it is informed greatly by this experience of, even if it is a community of just me with the patient, that person is going to have one other person in that room with them if they need it. I will be their community. And for me, that's a big lesson that I learned from my family and from my mom. But at that time, I was still very Christian, even as a Unitarian and Universalist. At that time, Jamie was still very Christian, and I didn't want to leave her. And she did not want to leave me. And so we were trying to figure out what family would look like for us going forward. And we got into, we stayed in the evangelical world of things as a doubting, you know, as a Unitarian Universalist, not really knowing those labels as a church per se, but just kind of as who I was understanding the world and Jesus. I played music for a Christian worship band in town. I played guitar and sang backup singers for years. Great friends of mine. I put out a Christian music album with them, uh, and uh, and so I was still very much in the evangelical world of things, even in the midst of my doubt. In that time of things, Jamie started having her own questions about community and Jesus and God, and that's her story to tell. But we were becoming more in line with each other spiritually and theologically and how we understood the world. As I said, I was on the academic route of things. I graduated magna cum laude from OSU in Jewish studies. You know, I turned around at 0.75 for my first semester GPA and did pretty well. I got into the graduate program for master's degree in Hebrew at OSU. I was interested in the way I was interested in Jewish interpretations of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, which get really complicated and really fascinating. I mean, that's maybe a conversation for another time, but that was my jam. In the midst of that, I got really interested in Syriac Christianity, which is, if you think of the Christian church, you have the Greek church, or you have the Latin church, you have the Greek church, and then far east in modern day Iraq, even all the way over to India and China, is the Syriac church. And they were heretics of their own kind. It's a little bit of my appeal to them, my intellectual appeal to them at that time. And so I started learning Syriac, and I got invited to study at the University of Oxford in England, Syriac Christianity, and translate Syriac church fathers. He had 4 homilies, 4 sermons on the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and I was like, oh yes, this is my jam. So my wife, my 2 kids, and I pack up. We go over to Oxford, and I'm there, I'm doing my classes, I'm translating these homilies that have never been translated before. I'm the first person to translate them. I'm writing commentary on it, comparing his interpretation with early church fathers' interpretations, with early rabbinic interpretations, having a great old time. And at the end of that year, I was going to sit down for my exams, and pass my exams and go into the PhD program at Oxford. And I was on track to all do this. I sit down for my exams. My thesis is accepted and I get great reviews on my thesis. I sit down for my memory's dissolving now, but I think it's 4 exams. I passed 3 of them. I did not pass my 4th exam by about 4 or 5 points. And if you're familiar with the Oxford system of things, it's an all or nothing system. You don't get B's. There's no C's get degrees or D's get degrees in Oxford. You either get your degree or you don't. So after that year of time, a lot of money, a lot of emotional investment, I ended up with nothing really to show for myself. I did not pass that course. And so I was there on a student visa. I was no longer a student, couldn't stay there now. My kids, I had enrolled my kids they had gone to school there. I had enrolled my kids in we had all these plans. I again had to uproot my family at the last minute, bring them out of England, and we moved back to Columbus. And again, didn't quite know what the hell we were going to do. This seemed to be a pattern, a theme in my life, but that's okay. We learned to roll with the punches. But here's what happened when I came back from England. Well, let me do this. When I left for England, it was finally the first time I was able to break completely with the Christianity I was raised in. I was no longer in evangelical circles. I was kind of free to be who I was, who I wanted to be. I hung out with the Quakers there, which was a conservative Quaker group, which meant you hang out in silence, which was fantastic. So whenever I went to church, I just hung out in silence. Every now and then somebody would stand up. One person stood up and said, "War is stupid." And I was like, I can get behind that. War is stupid. Um, and but when I came back thinking, what the hell am I going to do? Uh, I was forced to give an honest assessment of what was going on. I went to Oxford because more than anything, Eric, the leader of the cult, said that I wasn't smart enough to handle academia. And I wanted to prove that son of a bitch wrong. And I had justified that in part because what I envisioned myself doing was recognizing the anxiety that I felt, the pain, the isolation that I felt as I left the cult and I left my faith, knowing that the academic rigors of things do that. I wanted to kind of provide almost pastoral care, chaplaining for people as they were going through their own anxiety, their own loss of faith, their own figuring out what the hell was going on. And so I thought to myself, how am I going to do that? That was really my passion. That was really what I wanted to do. The academic route, that was me trying to prove Eric wrong. Me, ever since I was a kid, I really just wanted to care for people. I wanted people to not be alone. That's why community was so important to me in the cult. That's why the community was so touching to me when my family proved me to not be alone. And so I figured, what the hell am I going to do now? I want to be with people in the place when their existential meaning, their spiritual crises are happening. And I looked around and I said, oh, there's this chaplain thing. I can do that. Let me find out what I need to do about that. Well, you need a Master's of Divinity degree and you need to be ordained by somebody. Well, forget Christianity. That's not going to work for me. I could lie, but I think too highly of being honest to be able to sign on the dotted line of a theology that I don't agree in. I said, well, I am quite literally Unitarian and Universalist right now. Let me check out the UU Church. So I started hanging out at First UU in Columbus, Ohio. And I said, hey, here's what I want to do. And Mark Bellatini, the pastor of the church at the time, said, great, let's do that. And he encouraged me in my exploration. I went to the Methodist Theological School in Ohio for my Master's of Divinity degree. And again, as I had people encouraging me to think for myself, to become more independent and really ask who it was, how do I make sense of the world, Unitarian and Universalism increasingly felt inauthentic to how I understood the world. If I was being honest about things, when I was in seminary, I remember one time in seminary for the introductions, the professor had us go around the room and say who we are, the church we belonged to, and how we were experiencing God. And it came to me and I was like, well, on my best day, I'm a deist. On my worst day, I'm an atheist. And that was kind of summarized my position at that time. And really what it meant to me was effectually, it all comes down to whether or not I believe, I don't know. In the end, there's little functional difference to me between how I live my life, whether I think God has created everything and walked away, or whether or not God doesn't exist. I leaned more on the agnostic to atheist side, if I was really being honest to myself. And so eventually I cast off the deist side of things, being too safe, too inauthentic to how I understood the world. And the more I became to embrace the secular side of things, this agnostic atheist side of things, being uncomfortable with using God language to describe how I understand the world, and make meaning. And as I really began to think about how much I value humanity and how much I believe in humanity's potential, I really started to embrace the humanist idea of things. And for all of the great things of the Unitarian Universalist Association and the ordination process, the higher up you get the more they want you to talk about God. Even if you don't believe in God, they want you to have some sort of understanding of God language. And I felt like that just didn't work for me anymore. And I had light touchings with people in the humanist community, HCCO, uh, uh, Gleb and Agnes, a few people that I met they were going to First UU at the time. Richard Jarvis, I knew from First UU and some smaller things I was doing there. At that point, the Humanist Society had finally gotten approval by the overarching licensure of chaplains to say, no, this humanist endorsement, this counts for us. We'll make this work. And as that became apparent, I said, all right, I'm not going to do this UU thing anymore. It's too much of a protection for how I actually see the world. I'm just going to embrace this humanist identity. This is who I am. This is how I believe. I believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all people. I believe in that humanity is able and responsible to live moral and ethical lives without supernaturalism. And I believe in this, in the importance of community, and I believe in the importance of our human connection, and that in the end, we don't need God to create meaning. We don't need God to live a meaningful life. And in my experience, my belief in God really got in the way. And in my experience of being at the bedside of a lot of people, their belief in God really got in the way. And so I said, you know what? I'm just gonna do this humanist thing. And I started to get involved in HCCO. And I found a community of people who said, yeah, we don't need God. We can have community without God. We can have community in different ways and doing different things. And we can live out moral and ethical lives in all sorts of different ways. And we can be good without God. And that invigorated me. The training process for being a chaplain, as I said, is you need to go through an internship and a residency. And I did that at Ohio Health. And even though they were all Christians of a variety of sorts, they all said to me, yeah, Ben, we can make this work. And they encouraged me to figure out what the hell it looked like to be a humanist chaplain. What it meant to care for a fundamentalist Christian from my own humanist perspective. As I became involved in that process of things, I became aware of this educator process, this educator endorsement, which is what I'm doing now, which is again about helping chaplains who are in training, who are coming into being with people in the crises of their lives. You'd be surprised how many chaplains go through their own crises of faith as they are at the bedside of people and trying to figure out where's my theology and how is that working for me right now, because it doesn't feel like it is. So now I'm actually in that educational process that I wanted to be in when I started that academic route of trying to get my PhD. And I'm able to do that authentically and find community from this humanist perspective. And for me, this has been such a freeing place. For me, humanism has allowed me to be the authority that I need to be for myself. I don't get to blame anybody else for all the bad that happens in the world, nor do I have to give any of the credit to anybody else that happens in the world, right? The good or the bad stops with me. And for me, that's a really great and freeing place to be. I don't have to say, thank God. Thank me. I was there. I did that. That's a pretty awesome place to be. I screwed up over there. Yeah, I did. I'm sorry about that. But that's not all that I am. I'm also this. And so for me, as I've come to embrace humanism, I've come to find this place of freedom, of encouragement, of my own authority and my own responsibility, and it's just been an exciting and life-giving place to be. In many ways, it was a place that I was looking for all along, trying to define myself over and against other people. But now I get to define myself by me and who I am and how I want to live the world. And that's a pretty great place to be. I think I made it right to an hour, didn't I, Carl? Close to it.
Yep.
You ready for
Right.
You ready for questions?
Bring it, Bob. Yeah.
Questions? I got 4, but I'll start with the last one because this is real for both you and me, excuse me. Since I've asked you to, when my time comes, I hope you're still around, and I hope it's a long, long time from now.
You and me both.
There's a very good chance that you may be the only non-believer in the room conducting the service. How's that feel? How do you handle that? Do you get any animosity from some of the people in the room? Or, I'm just curious if you've been in that situation before and how that all plays out.
Yeah, as a humanist chaplain, I'm in that position a lot. Again, it goes, there's a few things to that, Bob. It's complicated. One of it is, as I said before, listening to the emotion behind the theology. So when I was giving the gospel to my mom, it was a way, what I would consider an unhealthy way, but it was a way of trying to say I love you without saying I love you. And so oftentimes chaplains, it's not our role, but families think it is. They call us to come in and give their dying loved one the gospel. And I don't say, no, that's not my role. I don't say, you give him the gospel. I say, I hear how much you love Johnny and you're concerned about him. I go to the emotional side of things and they go, yeah, that's why I want him to give the gospel. And Johnny's usually in the room right next to him. And I go, Johnny, how does it feel to hear how much your dad loves you right now? And so I diffuse away from the theological argument to get to some of the emotional conversations that are really what I think are really going on in the room. That's one part of it. Another part of it is understanding that when it comes to the people who are dying and the funeral process and combating authority and combating views on the world, for me, it is about trying to do the best I can to honor the person at hand who is, the dying person, or in the case of your memorial, you, right? And for me, for all of his political issues, Orson Scott Card's work of the Speaker for the Dead, for me, it's a very humanist way of looking at memorial services. He tells the good and the bad of the person, the whole person. So for those of people who are idolizing the person who is dead, they have to deal with some of the shit that the person has done. For the person who thinks that dead person is a piece of shit, they have to deal with some of the good things that person has done. It's a whole story. It's a whole celebration of the good, the bad, the complexity of the human being, and rightly or wrongly, whatever that person, whatever anybody else's theology is, and the injection in that space, it comes down to how do we honor who Bob was, or who, in the dying process, who Bob is. And this is actually coming up real close to home a bit, Bob, in that my dad just died in January. He remained in his fundamentalist Christianity. So there is this internal tension of my dad's theology, and everybody, he was idolized and well loved by everybody around him. And so, for me, I had to walk that line of, honoring my dad, but also in the memory, the legacy that he wanted to leave behind, but also honoring my own experience of him, which was a bit more complicated than everybody else's. And allowing for those people who needed to find peace in the Christianity of my dad, giving them that space. But also for me, finding different ways of the legacies, holding on to the good sides of him, because, you know, I tend to see the bad side of him. So taking my own lesson of complicating my dad's, you know, yeah, he had some good things. He stuck around when I was growing up in ways that other people didn't. So, you know, that's kind of how I look at it, Bob. Does that answer any of that?
Yeah, well, I can tell you that once, and I still have to send you my eulogy that I've written, that it will make absolutely clear in there that what my views were. And it'll probably piss some people off, but, you know, that's part of what I am. Yep. I've pissed off a lot of people in my life, and some of them are probably going to go, man, he could be a real asshole. Guilty as charged.
If it's all right with you, I will celebrate it with you. You're like, yes. It sounds like he could be an asshole, but that also sounds like a part of who Bob was.
If you just mention the Cincinnati Reds baseball helmet, you'll get a lot of laughs.
I'll keep that in mind.
I got more if nobody else has got any. Here's an easy one. Did you know Mark Raphael at Ohio State?
Name is not ringing a bell.
Okay, he was one of my professors. He was in, I learned the Old Testament. We studied the Old Testament in his class. That's when I read all of the Old Testament was in his class. I mean, I'm not sure what his beliefs were. I mean, he was a Jewish studies professor. Great professor, great teacher.
Yeah, no, I mean, the Bible professor I had, who's still there right now, is Sam Meyer. Last I ran into him, he was a Presbyterian, but the good kind. Yeah.
The other side, the flip side of that, when I worked at Children's Hospital many years ago, we had our, I forget what they call them, not chaplains, but yeah. Anyway, we had a priest there. He was a hoot. He had some great jokes about priests. But are the religious, you're trained to deal with religious people, are the religious chaplains trained to deal with non-believers?
They are now. That's a part of what I do. Actually, everywhere from all of Ohio health chaplains get trained by me on secular people supporting us as we are dying or in parts of crises, the way that chaplains do, but for secular people. I also teach every year at OSU a course on that for their chaplains. I teach, have not taught directly at Children's Hospital in Columbus, but every year I do go to Nationwide or to Cincinnati Children's down in Cincinnati. I talk to Baptist Health about every year down in Louisville, Kentucky. And so it is a growing process, a growing awareness. And one of the great opportunities is that some of the other faculty, like one of the other faculty members at Ohio Health sits on the board of what's called the Association of Clinical Pastoral Education. Those are the people who oversee me. So she learns from me every time we talk, and she's in the leadership positions of this organization. The former president of the organization of the ACPE is up in Cleveland Clinic, and she met with me every month and had to deal with me as a humanist and being a chaplain every month. So it is a growth area of need within the community of chaplains, but it is happening, and there's lots of us. There's over 100 chaplains now across the country who are humanists, and while I'm the first humanist chaplain to get endorsed as a certified educator, I know of at least 5 people behind me endorsed by the Humanist Society who are in that same process, from Baylor, Texas, to California, to New England. We're getting out a broad swath of us across the country.
Well, incidentally, I did a project in Greenville, South Carolina many years ago with their sheriff's office, and what came across Bob Jones, speaking of cults, and the political power that they wield in that community is kind of scary.
Yes, it has waned a little bit in the last 10 years or so, but not by much.
No, that was
I'm
also.
going to break in here. Doris has a question. Doris, you are muted, so I'll let you unmute. All right, give her a second.
There we go.
There. Hey, Doris.
There we go. Perfect.
Just a couple of questions. I was just wondering how, Ben, your wife, handled all this change, and when is she humanist also? And how'd your children fare through all this?
Great questions. My wife is more hostile to organized religion than I am these days. But she considers herself, I would label her as a secular jujuist. She talks about good juju and bad juju, but she also doesn't really believe in God either. So, she's on board. She supports me. My kids are both secular kids. We've raised them to be secular, that's created some challenges for them. But at this point, actually, Eric Ringquist is a good friend of mine. He's a different Eric. He's not that Eric. They're great kids. They are caring, loving, compassionate people. They stand up for themselves, and they do it really from a secular perspective.
Nice. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I had a couple questions too.
Yeah.
Segueing off of Doris there, you said that you've raised your kids secularly, but I thought you were saying that you were going to school in England while you had kids then.
Yep.
My point was you had at least a few kids or a kid while you were in the fundamentalist cult.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know, maybe you had some after you got out, but I would expect that, them growing up in it, didn't you have to do a little bit of deconversion, or did you just tell them, Santa Claus isn't real and they're okay with that?
Good question. Yeah. So they were real young when we left, ultimately. My youngest doesn't even remember any time in the cult. They're 18. My oldest was probably in 3rd grade. She's 22 now. There might have been a little need of deconverting her, but not much. I raised my kids even in the community, the cult, in a way of I wanted them to decide for themselves. So, my youngest even remembers me teaching her the Bible in our kitchen and going, here's the Genesis 1 narrative. What do you make of it? Here's what people say about it, but what do you say about it? Well, I think it's this way or that way. And I always encouraged within them independent thinking and trying to analyze stuff. I think that's a part of what drew me out of the cult, in a sense, this need for independent thinking and analysis, and created some tension in that space. Yeah, for me, for them, they just kind of rolled with the parents anyway, in a sense, as kids often do. And as they aged through their realm, like my oldest, I was still involved in the UU church when my oldest was in her teen years, and they have a great developing of your own theology, make your own theology course, which encourages kids to do anything from some form of Christianity to atheism or whatever, figure out what you believe for yourself. And I encouraged that independent thinking, and she landed in the humanist atheist realm of things. I asked my youngest at one point, do you consider yourself atheist, humanist, something else? And she's like, I'm an atheist. She doesn't even like the humanist claim of things. She doesn't really think about it a whole lot, but she's an atheist.
Mm-hmm. I had another question. You talked about how you went to see your mother when she was dying, and then you got in trouble for that in the cult, and you did that twice, and each time they brought you in front of the men of the church to reprimand you. What did you say when you were brought in front of them? I mean, were you being apologetic? Did you feel apologetic?
Oh wow, nobody's asked me that one. That's a good one. Yeah, there. I mean, it was apologetic when you're. The experience of a cult is an abusive environment, and when you're in an abusive environment, even when you disagree with somebody, you tuck your tail, and you. And so that's a lot of what I did in that space at that point was, yeah, no, I hear you. I'm sorry. I probably, I shouldn't have done that. I understand. I don't want to be yoked to my mom. I understood it as a sin. I repented. I was brought out of communion with that group, so I was not allowed to take communion while I was in that space of things. I was getting corrected. So that was a part of the process, but yeah, I mean, it was not rational. It was a very much of a cover my butt and accept the lashes, because that's what you're supposed to do, because that's what a good person does in this space.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You had talked about early on when you were studying Old Testament God, New Testament God, and the yin, not yin yang. It's how do these chaplains that you work with, and maybe other people study more religion than I have, understand, how do they reconcile those two different beings? Because it's totally, I mean, the Old Testament, it's wrath of God, killing people, and you walk on the wrong side of the street, buddy, you need to be stoned to death. It's just craziness. And then the New Testament, obviously, much different. How do they reconcile those differences? The people who proselytize this stuff.
It depends on the person. The more progressive people understand it as they see the human failings of the writers more than that actually being a representation of God as love. More conservative, traditional Christianity sees the punishment, the wrath of God, as an expression of God's love, the disciplinary parent idea of things. But honestly, most people in the conservative traditions don't end up in the chaplaincy world, because it just creates it. It leans towards the more open-minded Christian in order to really handle that space of things. That's not to say there aren't more conservative Christian chaplains. There certainly are, but they tend to be in a minority in that space of things.
Been in my experience, a lot of people that talk about it, they've never read the book anyway, so they don't know. They don't really realize this is two separate beings.
Yeah, and some people find ways to homogenize or to make them into one person, more honestly kind of a complex personality. But it just depends on the person, the tradition they're in. To be a chaplain, everybody has to get a master's of divinity, so they've all had some sort of higher education piece of things. So that inevitably creates some complication into the worldview. But yeah. I also am aware that Debbie and Randall have hands up, and I don't want to
Yeah.
ignore them.
Yeah. Debbie, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you for your talk. I was curious about the role of women or females in your fundamentalist cult you were in, and if that was complicated at all in your coming out, or did you not have to look at that, or was there anything there for you in that
Oh,
aspect?
absolutely there were. Yeah. Thank you for asking. This is why I love this community. You ask questions that nobody asks, and it allows me to flesh out the story beyond just the hour presentation. Thank you for asking that. Yeah, it was a big concern of mine that the fundamentalist church, the cult I was in, really tried to force me to see my wife as less than myself, as being my helpmeet, I was the head of the household. She had to do, ultimately, she had to do what I had to say. And that was not how I experienced our relationship. Our relationship has always been more of a partnership, and I valued that give and take with her. And it really concerned me that that I was raising two daughters at the time, and that they were going to be marrying into the space of things. And it really bothered me that I did not want them to marry into this, I did not want them to be treated the way that this church was encouraging men to treat their wives. And that really, that was a big concern of mine. I remember one meeting I was at, one of the men in the group made no money. His wife had constant anxiety of how they were going to pay the bills and feed their family. He had agreed with her that he was always going to pack his lunch as a way of saving money, et cetera, et cetera. He decided that he didn't want to do that anymore because he wanted to go out and eat lunch with his friends, and that the real manly, godly thing to do would be to go do that. So he went out and he ate lunch with his friends and spent a week's worth of groceries on that one lunch, and came back with the receipt and threw it on the table and said, "There, look, see what I did?" And I was just like, what the hell, man? Even if you want to, that is just irresponsible. And the church leader held that up as, yes, that was the godly thing to do. And that was a part that happened in the part of my journey where I was already starting to separate myself from this community. And at that point I was like, that was one of those things where like, yeah, this is really just not the place for me.
Randall?
I was interested when you were talking, Ben, about when the leader of the cult encouraged you to go to OSU to do Jewish studies. That surprises me very much, because I would think that the leader of a cult, whose cults tend to thrive on limiting sources of information, and if this person was your exclusive, well, more or less your exclusive source of information on the history of Judaism and Christianity, it would be very perilous to encourage you to go to OSU and study this topic, wouldn't it? What do you think about this now as you reflect on how that happened?
I think he regrets it because he never did it again. I also think he was arrogant enough to think that he could negotiate that. A part of his influence at that time was he could make, in his mind, he could make a clear distinction between himself and a Jewish advisor versus himself and a Christian advisor. So he made sure that I did not have a Christian advisor who I could have had. The Jewish Studies department has people from all sorts of different faith traditions in their department. I could have had Sam Meyer, the Hebrew Bible professor that I talked about earlier, Presbyterian, but Eric made sure that I did not have that person, but instead I had this rabbinic guy, Michael Swartz, who, so that at the very least, I think Eric was arrogant enough to think that I can counteract the Jewish guy. It would be harder for me to counteract the Christian guy. He chose poorly, to my benefit. And yeah, I mean, one of the things that really started me to think about things was something that Michael Swartz said in a rabbinic class was, we were studying different expectations of the Messiah, was you would know who the Messiah was because he won, and Jesus lost because he died. And I kind of had to go, oh, wait a second. Because if you read the majority of the texts that talk about messianic expectations, that they're, the descriptions of the Messiah or the Messiahs in some texts, this Messiahs they were going to win. And the fact that Jesus died showed that he lost, and you needed to create a new narrative that Jesus was not really dead, that he was really going to live again. He really is living on, and he's going to come back, and then he's really going to win. We're just waiting for him to really win, which that was part of the crumbling for me. But I think it was a lot of arrogance on Eric's part to kind of think that he could guide me through that space.
Eric, looks like you have a question.
Two quick comments. Friends and workmates know me by the nickname of Bing, B-I-N-G. And after the last hour, I understand, Ben, why you've been so accepting of that nickname.
Yes, it's weird to call you Eric.
Yes, I can imagine. And the other quick comment I have is, and I think, Ben, you've heard the story, when my dad was dying in the hospital 11 years ago. Well, I was raised Lutheran LCA, and he was hardcore Lutheran, taught Sunday school and all the such. But on his last day, he asked for last rites, which now absolutely tickles me, because I'm convinced that was because people ask for last rites in movies. And I've just talked with Ben about, or part of this discussion talked with Ben about administering to people of different beliefs. And that's your job. You don't deny them what they are asking for. That's all I wanted to say.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Bing.
Yes, sir.
We've got a question from Jace in the chat.
Yes.
I'll read it out so people don't have to go looking for it. Ben, how did your views towards the LGBTQ community change as you progressed through these various stages of belief?
I'm a broken record, but lovely question, Jace. So in high school, so I use masculine pronouns, he, him, his. Honestly, I've said often, if I were raised now, I would probably use they, them, their pronouns. When I was in high school, I did not know what it was to be masculine. Like I didn't feel right as a man. The only representation I had available to me at the time that I saw, that I had easy access to, was the villain of Silence of the Lambs, and I can't think of his name off the top of my head. So that was not a very good representation. So it really scared the hell out of me that I didn't, that I had a bit of, I was unsettled as to what my gender identity was. For me, I worked through that to understand masculinity difference, and I've grown to be comfortable with he, him, his, but I could see now in a different environment where I may have ended up differently. I'm also aware that at the time I was confused because I was attracted to women, but I'm also attracted to men. And that is also a sin. And so for me, there was a lot of internal turmoil and fear of judgment and hell towards my own membership within the queer community. I didn't recognize it at that point. I recognized it as an invitation to sin and damnation. But as I moved out of that space, really quickly after I left the cult, I recognized my own bisexuality and became comfortable with identifying that way, even though I wasn't out with a lot of people about it at that time. But the communities I was raised up in, the cult I was in, all of it taught any flavor of the LGBTQIA plus community as sin, as damnation, and that was a part of my own internal crises, depression, anxiety, thoughts of hurting myself, suicidal ideation growing up. And for me, as I moved out of that space, and as I again was able to define myself for myself, that for me was just a freeing place to be, where I could be like, you know what, I'm bisexual. That's who I am. That's okay, and that's great. Actually, I could celebrate that. I remember going to my first Pride parade and just being like overwhelmed by all of these beautiful people being themselves. And a part of my tension even now is, I still, I say I've come to terms with masculinity and using he, him, his pronouns, and I have, but there are times when I'm like, yeah, maybe I could use they, them, there, but I'm also kind of lazy. But I really appreciate the authenticity of people who are really able to claim for themselves their identities, and I love to celebrate that.
Bob.
Now, I was in the hospital about 3.5 years ago with pneumonia, and I did not die, as far as I can tell. And Ben came as a chaplain at one point. We did not talk about Jesus, as far as I remember. It was a nice visit. I appreciated it. I do have a question. What if a person you're visiting in the hospital, maybe that never happens right now, requests something like communion, for example, in which you don't believe? Can you say, I can't do that, but this priest can do it, or something? Do you ever have to refer people to another chaplain?
Yeah, I do. If my secular perspective has not come out at that point, I make it clear to them who I am. That I'm not a Christian, that I'm a humanist chaplain. I know the rites and rituals. I'd be glad to provide them for you, or I have Christian colleagues that I'd be glad to refer you to, and they can be up as soon as they can to, provide this ceremony for you, or this rite for you. It's probably 80-20. They ask for me to get a Christian, 20% of the time they're like, yeah, you'll work. All right. I was raised in those traditions. I know the language, I know the rights. And for me, again, if it's about that community, if it provides a community and a connection to somebody, and helps them provide meaning in their suffering at that moment, I'm not going to deny it to them.
Eric brought something up when I was going through paramedic training many years ago. We were told if we had somebody in the back of the truck and they were dying, that if they requested last rites, we had to give it to them. And I'm looking at her going, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. Number one, I wouldn't know what to say. And number two, it's like, sorry, can't do that.
Yep.
I don't know I don't know if they're still teaching that or not, because that was, oh my gosh, 22 or 24 years, whatever, a long time ago.
Yeah, I don't know if they teach that you have to do it now. But the doctrine, at least in the Catholic Church, is that in the case of emergency, pretty much anybody can do it and it's okay.
Okay.
but only in the case of emergency. Like you got to be really in the EMT on your deathbed, you know, in the squad on your deathbed, your last breath, for somebody other than a Catholic priest to give last rites, or what's called now anointing of the sick, and for it to,
We were
for lack of a better word, for it to take.
we were usually a little busy at the time too, so.
Yeah, I get that.
What if the emergency vehicles had a Last Rites DVD installed somewhere?
I'll bring that up to the Columbus Fire Department next time I see them.
Yeah.
I'm sure that'll go over real well. If I knew a fireman, they'd have some other kind of goofy movie in there, Transformers or something like that.
Debbie, you have your hand up again? Yeah.
Yes, I had another question or wondering, curiosity. I'm an atheist living in a family. I'm an adult child who's living in a family that is fundamentalist Christian, and I run into so much the problem of being surrounded by that and having to take part in it while I know I don't believe, but yet wanting to not, cause conflict. I'm just curious, and inside myself, I have to reconcile, constantly what I'm doing and what I can to do and what I can. I'm just curious, how do you reconcile? It sounds like in your position, you are called upon to do some of these religious things, and it's out of love. It sounds like that you're doing them and a deep appreciation for the other person's values. And if that's correct, I'm curious if it leaves any kind of thing in, dissonance or whatever in you that you have to reconcile with, and how do you do that, or how is that for you inside?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I will say it is much more complicated and harder to do that with my family than it is to do that with patients. With patients, when I see my role as the chaplain as empowering my patients to find meaning out of their situation, and that comes from the understanding and helping explore with them their framework, and how they make meaning out of their lives and out of their suffering, and so a part of the training to be a chaplain, because we're professional chaplaincy in a hospital setting in particular is a interfaith, interworldview practice. My Christian colleagues don't get to turn down Muslim patients ask for help, or humanist patients ask for help, just because they disagree with us, and I don't get to turn down them. And so it is a practice, a learning of how to enter into people's worldviews to encourage people to figure it out for themselves. And some people do it better than others. For me, there has to be, for me, I had to have an appreciation for cognitive dissonance and irony at times. And sometimes having an internal chuckle that this person who just said, I don't understand how atheists do this, is talking to an atheist and they don't know it. And also trying to turn down my own defensiveness at that time to let them go, well, how do you do it? I understand that you don't understand how an atheist does this, but how do you do it right now? And exploring that piece with them. Yeah, for me, Doris or Debbie, you're right. It is about compassion. It's about honoring their individualism, how they make meaning. A part of the most recent Humanist Manifesto, there's a line in there that I love that says, humane values can be found in all traditions. And I believe that's true. And so I try to help people find the humane values in their traditions. And so I tend to encourage my patients to move away from those I'm a sinner and worthless in God's eyes, to encourage some of those more humane aspects of Christianity that might focus on God's love and forgiveness and acceptance and pieces of things. But yeah, I mean, in the end of the day, there is a separation for my patients between that's them, this is me. Like, as I said, it's much harder with my family. When it comes to my fundamentalist dad, we had an ambivalent relationship. I saw him maybe once a year. And when we talked, it was a don't ask, don't tell kind of process of things. And I think one of the gifts that I was able to claim for myself in his dying process was confusing him a little bit by the compassion of his atheist son. And he responded several times like, "You were so patient." I'm like, well, what? Yeah, I mean, for me, again, legacy being important, I think I learned a lot of that patience from him, and so I would highlight that. Like, I learned that from you, Dad. And so, focusing on those things for me that connect us together is a more helpful place. But sometimes people don't want to do that. Sometimes, I have an asshole brother-in-law. If he sees this, he knows I think he's an asshole, so no biggie. But you just can't. He refuses to find any common ground with anybody different than himself. And in that space, I think it is a healthier, better, safer place for people to be. Just be like, I can't have a meaningful relationship with that person. Acknowledging that hurts, that might be disappointing. But for my own sake, I need to limit that relationship.
Yeah, I've had the thought as you were talking. I'm often reminded if you go on the internet and someone has a problem with their PC, there's always that one asshole who writes, "Buy a Mac." You're not helping.
Yes.
Like, you've literally done nothing to help and just shown that you're a jackass.
Yep. There are religious versions of that, which I think we can all probably have some experience with.
Yes.
One positive I found about Donald Trump being such what he was is that I was able to find common ground with a lot of my very religious friends because they are also good, compassionate people who felt about him the way I did. We had some constructive conversations based on that, kind of working our way around the religious thing that they, as Christians, they had no use for him whatsoever because we all know he's not and demonstrates absolutely none of the positive attributes of Christianity. So in that one, I found that to be, like you just said, finding common ground with people you disagree with. There was one place we did find some common ground, and I hope made our friendships a little better.
I think that's a lost gift these days, of learning to find common ground with each other. That's a part of what I've enjoyed in my experience as a chaplaincy is if I'm going to do my job well, I have to. And so I've it's been a very good learning experience for me.
You said about the Master Divinity, if someone wants to become a humanist chaplain, they don't have to get a Master Divinity, do they?
Or equivalent. We figure out what that equivalency is on a case-by-case basis, but most humanist chaplains, just because it's easier to get recognized by the board certification committee or the organization that board certifies chaplains, it's just easier to have an MDiv. And most humanist chaplains do their Master of Divinity through like a UU seminary that's kind of friendly to humanists. Honestly, Bethesda or MTSO, pretty progressive, open-minded place. They, some of the professors didn't know what the hell to do with me, and others really just encouraged me to figure it out for myself, and were journeying with me too.
And one of the things I was going to comment was, is slowly, as I became less and less religious, and eventually, started to reflect back, the one thing I think that is fairly common, especially if you're coming from a fundamentalist background, is that very black and white way of looking at things. This is right, this is wrong. One of it's probably the single thing that pushed me away from religion, and also one of the things that attracted me to humanism is recognizing that people are messy. It's not, they're not good people and bad people, they're people. And actually, that's one of the most hilarious things about atheism and humanism is, like we try to think, oh, we're good people. No, we've got assholes too. Like there are just as many assholes over here as there are in the church, and just as many kind, loving, compassionate people in the churches. It's just people are people, and find all stripes. There's people have their redeeming qualities and they don't. So not really a question so much as just something appreciated from the what you are saying.
Yeah, I think I think we have atheists who tend to have that fundamentalist perspective of right and wrong and in and out, and we have atheists who are not that way, and I think, in my experience, Christians in particular like to focus on the assholes of atheism, the fundamentalists of atheism, instead of in the more relational, more understanding of things, open-ended side of things. I remember I had a really big, one of my first, in the process of becoming an educator, you have to present on your philosophy, what they would call theology, over and over and over again, kind of refining it and explaining how it informs your practice. And the first time I did that as this educator route, one of the people in the committee who was there for my consultation was minister in the American Baptist tradition, which tends to be a fairly progressive tradition on the Baptist side of things, but was really honing in on human evil and why was I just insisting, like I didn't insist that humans were good, but I wasn't also going to call them sinful. I'm not like that. Sin language is not a part of me. Humans are messy. I don't worship humanity. I don't think we're all good, but I don't think we're all bad either. And we had this huge argument, and that thing, like, he just needed me to have some theology of sin, and I just refused to have a theology of sin. But yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, no, humans are humans, good, bad, we're creatures, we've evolved. That means we're gonna mess up. That means we're gonna get into our instincts, and that's going to be messy, and sometimes we let our prefrontal cortex get in the way of our instincts and help us do some other good things, and sometimes we don't.
Yeah. Bob, did you have something? Or
the conversation kind of moved on, but I'll say it anyway. I've discovered, I grew up in a sort of liberal religious tradition, which I haven't totally left. I'm still connected with a lot of people there. People who become atheists often are atheists in the very same style in which they're religious. So if somebody has a black and white worldview, they just do a flip-flop and they have an anti-God black and white worldview. And if they come from a more liberal, less rectilinear is not quite the word I want, worldview, they tend to be not as black and white. It's so the personality is almost more important than whether they believe in God or not. That's sort of what I was going to say.
I think there's truth to that. I mean, my dad, fundamentalist, right and wrong though he was, really did teach me a lot about loving the other person, and the importance of compassion and understanding each other. As I said, he taught English, and so he taught me literary criticism, which is great when you're reading Steinbeck. It was more problematic for him when I applied that to the Bible. But that critical thinking, that desire for community and compassion, I see as a lot coming from his own side of things too. I don't know that, I think that if I were in a different household, more a family that was really tried and true. I don't see my dad really as tried and true fundamentalist in that pure black and white things. He did allow some gray into his world, whether he admitted it or not. I don't know that I would be as gray as I am now.
Oh, and there are evangelical humanists who I know and non-evangelical humanists.
Yep. I've been accused of being an evangelical humanist sometimes, but I just say, I'm excited about being a humanist. You're excited about being a Christian. I will tell you about my humanism. You tell me about your Christianity. I've won a couple converts over too, by the way.
Nice.